Bolivia possesses abundant natural resources, making it one of the world's richest nations. These pictures will give you an idea of what I mean. The Uni salt flat is a true gold mine in this White Sea. The world's largest salt flat is this one. The salt flat is larger than both Qatar and the entire island of Jamaica, to give you an indication of its scale. And the reason I call this a gold mine is that the world's largest quantities of lithium, the key material needed to make batteries, are found on this salt flat. It turns out that the Uni salt flat has almost 25% of all the lithium in the world. Because of this unprecedented battery consumption, several economists have dubbed Bolivia the Saudi Arabia of the 21st century. But despite such wealth, Bolivia is one of the countries that produces the least lithium in the world. That's correct, Bolivia is unable to take advantage of this gold mine. Furthermore, Bolivians are being sold a dream by their current president, Luis Arce, which is that their government is industrializing Bolivia to greatness. Beneath these assurances, though, lies a somber truth: Bolivia is on the brink of collapse. Yes, the Bolivian economy is a ticking time bomb that could blow at any second. And because the Bolivian government is running out of money, it is all set to blow up. It is running out of money and has limitless resources that it is unable to harvest. I go into great length in this video about why Bolivia is in danger of collapsing and might end up being the next Venezuela. Let us first discuss the financial situation of the Bolivian government. Here in this graph you will see the famous foreign currency reserves. These reserves are like the savings bank that a country has and are denominated in dollars. 10 years ago Bolivia had almost $14 billion in international reserves. But as you will see, this amount has been plummeting every year, reaching only $165 million today. The reason this money has been disappearing is because the government has been spending it incessantly. Here in this graph you will see the Bolivian government's budget. As you will see, since 2014 the government has been running a deficit in relation to its economy. A deficit means that the government spends more money than it takes in. However, the government cannot be in the negative, so in order to pay the deficit, they must borrow money in addition to the funds from their overseas reserves, which I have already shown you. And as you will see, these reserves have been deteriorating nonstop to $165 million today, which is 1% of what they had in 2014. But the issue of reserves and fiscal deficit is only the tip of the iceberg. The Bolivian government is currently more indebted than it has ever been. As I previously mentioned, the government has also been borrowing money to cover its deficit. Here in this graph you will see the debt in relation to the entire Bolivian economy. This figure reaches almost 83% of the Bolivian economy. In other words, if Bolivia wanted to pay its debts, it would have to put the whole country to work for a minimum of 11 months as slaves. In other words, going back a bit, the Bolivian government had a boom that culminated in 2014. The government had access to over $14 billion at the time. However, ever since, the government has been running a deficit due to spending more money than it has received. The government has been spending all of its savings and borrowing money at very unsustainable levels in order to pay down that deficit. The crucial point at hand is how the Bolivian government was able to amass such a large sum of money in 2014 and what it was used for. Bolivia, it turns out, is among the nations with the greatest abundance of natural resources worldwide. Bolivia has been a major exporter of precious metals of all kinds ever since the colonial era. And natural gas was one of the resources that helped Bolivia experience its best years. That's right, here in this chart you will see what Bolivia's biggest exports are. As you will see, natural resources dominate exports and natural gas is number one. It turns out that large international oil firms found enormous natural gas reserves in Bolivia throughout the 2000s. Additionally, during Evo Morales' first term in office, he made the decision to nationalize every Bolivian company that produced and exploited hydrocarbons. To put it plainly, he took over all of the foreign companies' operations and interests, transferring them to the Bolivian government. Naturally, these foreign corporations also discovered these gas deposits. To put it briefly, the government was successful in this nationalization. The government started to exploit and export the discovered gas to nearby nations including Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina through its state-owned enterprise YPFB. The Bolivian government experienced golden years during which it received more money than it spent, thanks to the selling of gas. The wasting started there because the government had a lot of money to spend and relatively little debt at the time. If you are enjoying this video and want to be aware of new videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. The Bolivian government began providing social services, establishing hospitals and schools, and making large financial investments to industrialize the country. Among these projects were sugar mills, gas and oil refineries, urea and ammonia facilities, and several other enterprises. Many people view the majority of these industrial initiatives as failures since they were not profitable. A misallocation of the funds earned from the sale of the valuable gas in Bolivia. However, that brings up another important point. The Bolivian national is not well treated by his administration. That's correct. Bolivia's ruling party is known as the Movement to Socialism, and like all governments in Latin America, it promotes leftist and populist policies in a nation that is deeply impoverished. The subsidization of gas, diesel, gasoline, and wheat is one of these strategies. In other words, all of these things are imported by the government at a higher cost, but they are sold to Bolivian citizens for a reduced price. As an illustration, 1 liter of gasoline costs roughly 40 cents of a dollar in Bolivia, but it costs nearly 3 times as much in Brazil, Bolivia's neighbor. Furthermore, as the nation's engines of economic growth include gas, diesel, gasoline, and wheat, this is resulting in extremely low levels of inflation. Here in this graph you will see the inflation levels in Bolivia. As you will see, in the last 5 years inflation in Bolivia has hovered around 1 to 2% per year. Remember, inflation means the rise in consumer prices. This indicates that Bolivians' cost of consumption has not increased all that much. While inflation is significantly higher in nearby nations like Brazil and Argentina. All of this is perfectly normal, nothing is wrong, but it is entirely artificial since Bolivia's government imports wheat, diesel, and gasoline, the country's most vital resources, at a low cost. But the government needs to spend a lot of money to keep the costs of all these resources low and the inflation rate low. And that brings us to the crux of Bolivia's issue. Remember I showed you that Bolivia no longer has any savings when you look at the international reserves? And remember I showed you that the Bolivian government is more indebted than ever? Well, this means that the Bolivian government has no more money. The government is struggling to keep up this system of wheat, diesel, and gasoline subsidies since its funds are running low. Intervening in the banking sector and seizing control of the dollars in circulation in Bolivia is one of these actions. This is only one more crucial information. Because the Bolivian government imports wheat, diesel, and gasoline using these dollars, it is interested in the amount of money in circulation. As a result, the AFP's pension funds are now under the supervision of the Bolivian government. The pension funds are shared by all. All Bolivian workers have access to these enormous pension funds, which have over $20 billion saved. Ideally, this money would be invested in profitable ventures. And a large portion of those assets were obligations in the form of corporate and government bonds issued by other nations, as well as equities on foreign stock exchanges. Since the government has chosen to assume management of these pension funds, it now has power over those dollars. However, the administration has gone one step farther. As a result, the government has ordered Bolivian banks to repatriate their funds, prohibiting them from holding more than 8% of their assets outside of the nation. Repatriation refers to the return of those funds, under official supervision, to Bolivia. Because of all of this, Bolivia's currency is seeing the same downward trend as Argentina's dollar. That is the dollar's equivalent to 6.97 Bolivian pesos, as stated by the Central Bank of Bolivia. This rate has been in place for almost 10 years. In actuality, though, a dollar is currently worth 7.70 Bolivian pesos on the underground market, a differential of more than 10%. The lack of dollars in the banking system is the cause of this parallel market since the government uses them all for its own costs. Let's now take a further step back. Thus, since 2014, the Bolivian government has been experiencing a bonanza period. However, those funds were misused for unsuccessful initiatives and for improperly acclimating Bolivian citizens to subsidies. In other words, the government provides its people with wheat, diesel, and gasoline at a significantly lower cost than the global market. But to import all these resources and sell them to Bolivians at a discount, the government must pay a heavy price out of its own coffers in order to do all of this. Furthermore, the government is employing force to nationalize and regulate the flow of currency into the nation now that it is broke. This has created an underground market for dollars, even though it's a temporary solution. And here's where the crucial query arises. What will happen now that the government is starved for cash and the populace depends on government handouts to purchase wheat, fuel, and gasoline? The government, then, essentially has three choices. Increasing debt is the first step. The second is to look for another way to make money. The third is to choose to stop providing cheap wheat, fuel, and gasoline to the people of Bolivia. As the Bolivian government has one of the lowest credit ratings in the world, according to Standard & Poor's, the first choice is obviously not feasible. Obviously, Bolivia is now unable to borrow additional funds. However, the government intends to attempt to spend the entire year increasing its already excessive debt, as per the approved 2024 budget. With regard to lithium, the government is recommending the second alternative. In other words, the government claims that by mining and industrializing lithium, it will prevent Bolivia from collapsing. As you may remember from the video's opening, Bolivia is home to a lithium gold mine. Investments totaling billions of dollars are needed to fully utilize this lithium. The government does not have this amount of money. However, Bolivia has inked agreements with Chinese and Russian businesses since the middle of 2023 in order to use this lithium. The main issue is that this kind of exploitation is time-consuming, and Bolivia might not see a sizable source of lithium revenue until 2027. Thus, this choice is also unfeasible. Lastly, the government could decide to improve its financial situation and cease providing subsidies for wheat, diesel, and gasoline. Everything in Bolivia will become extremely expensive if this occurs, and wages won't likely increase at the same amount. Uncontrolled inflation as a result of this will result in political and social instability. Regretfully, this is the most plausible situation and most certainly the only sensible course of action. Wheat, diesel, and gasoline subsidies will need to be gradually discontinued by the government, but they will do so in an unusual manner. They will most likely accomplish this by inciting shortages of gasoline and diesel across the nation, which will have an impact on every sector of the economy since these are the primary fuels used to generate everything. Bolivia is therefore facing a very serious economic crisis and does not appear to have a bright future. Regardless of whether is in power or not, Bolivia faces challenging times in the years to come. And for that reason, I would like to know what you anticipate the Bolivian government doing in this kind of circumstance. And who do you believe will confront such a circumstance? Tell us what you think in the comments section.